Blood is supposed to be thicker than water, but in my family, it's just a tool for extortion. Dumped at 4 months old so my parents could chase their selfish fantasies, I was entirely forgotten. Until my grandfather passed away, leaving me his $3.4 million estate. Now, the vultures are circling. My name is Samantha. I was exactly 123 days old when my parents, Nathaniel and Beatrice, decided that raising an infant was a heavy anchor dragging down their glamorous lifestyle. They didn't drop me off at a hospital or surrender me to the state. Instead, they drove out to my paternal grandfather's house in rural Oregon, placed my baby carrier on his front porch, next to a half-empty box of cheap diapers, rang the doorbell, and sped off into the night. Grandpa Gregory found me wailing in the freezing October mist. Pinned to my pink fleece blanket was a hurriedly scribbled note on the back of a grocery receipt. She needs more time and money than we have. We're moving to Italy to start our importing business. Sorry, Dad. That was it. That was the totality of my parents' goodbye. Gregory Hayes was a hardened, 60-year-old widower at the time. He smelled permanently of sawdust, diesel fuel, and Old Spice aftershave. He owned a heavy machinery repair business and several acres of industrial real estate. He was not a man accustomed to rocking, screaming infants or mixing formula at 3 a.m, but he didn't hesitate. He took me in, legally adopted me, when Nathaniel and Beatrice formally relinquished their parental rights from a consulate in Milan and became the single greatest force of love in my entire life. Growing up, I was the proverbial ghost child to the people who brought me into the world. While other kids at school made macaroni art for Mother's Day, I made mine for Grandpa Gregory. He would hang my crooked, glue-smeared projects in his main office at the repair yard, right next to the massive calendars of bulldozers and excavators. He taught me how to change the oil in a pickup truck by the time I was 10, how to balance a ledger by 15, and how to spot a liar by the time I could legally vote. Through the years, my biological parents were nothing but a rumor. Once every 3 or 4 years, a glossy postcard would arrive. A picture of the Eiffel Tower or a sunset in Santorini, usually with a generic, unfeeling message scrawled on the back. Business is booming. Hope the kid is doing well. N and B. They never called on my birthday. They never sent a Christmas gift. When I was 12, a stray letter arrived containing a photograph. It was Nathaniel and Beatrice, looking tanned and wealthy, standing on a yacht next to a little blonde boy who looked to be about 5 years old. Meet your brother, Preston, the back of the photo read. I remember staring at that picture until my vision blurred with tears. They hadn't given up on being parents. They had just given up on being my parents. Grandpa Gregory found me crying over that photo in the kitchen. I remember him taking the picture from my trembling hands, walking calmly to the sink, and dropping it into the garbage disposal before turning it on. He knelt down, his massive calloused hands wiping the tears from my cheeks. "Family isn't who makes you, Sammy," he said, his gravelly voice thick with emotion. "Family is who stays when things get hard. You are my daughter. You are my legacy. Don't you ever shed another tear over tourists." And I didn't. I poured everything into my life with him. When I graduated high school, I skipped the out-of-state college experience to stay close, attending a local university while working part-time managing the accounts for his growing industrial estate. Gregory's business acumen was legendary in our county. He quietly bought up cheap, barren land on the outskirts of town in the 90s, which, over 2 decades, became the epicenter of a massive commercial development boom. He was a self-made millionaire who still drove a beat-up 2004 Ford F-150 and wore flannel shirts with holes in the elbows. Then, the brutal reality of time caught up with us. When I was 24, Grandpa Gregory was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctor's words in that sterile white room felt like a physical blow to my chest. They gave him 6 months. I immediately dropped everything. I moved my laptop into his hospital room and later into his bedroom when we transitioned to hospice care at home. I managed his businesses from my phone while administering his morphine, holding his hand through the agonizing nights and reading him his favorite Western novels when he was too weak to keep his eyes open. In his final days, he was lucid but incredibly fragile. He gripped my hand one rainy Tuesday afternoon, his breathing shallow. "Sammy," he wheezed, his eyes locking onto mine with an intense burning clarity. I fixed it. I fixed the leaks. When the wolves come, and they will come, you let them break their own teeth. I didn't understand what he meant. I was too consumed by grief to ask. 2 days later, my grandfather, my father, my entire world took his last breath. He was 84 years old. The silence in the house after he passed was deafening. I felt entirely untethered, drifting in a sea of logistical nightmares, arranging the funeral, signing death certificates, and trying to keep his businesses running while my own heart was shattered. Little did I know, the hardest part hadn't even begun. My grandfather's warning about the wolves was about to manifest in the flesh. It rained on the day of the funeral, a heavy, unyielding Oregon downpour that matched the crushing weight in my chest. We held a graveside service, attended by dozens of local contractors, mechanics, and friends Gregory had made over his 84 years. I was standing under a black umbrella, staring blankly at the polished mahogany casket, when a sleek, black Mercedes G-Wagon rolled slowly into the cemetery, its tires crunching aggressively over the wet gravel. It parked illegally on the grass. The heavy doors opened, and out stepped Nathaniel and Beatrice. I hadn't seen them in person for 24 years, but I recognized them instantly. Nathaniel wore a sharp, tailored Italian suit that screamed expensive, though it was slightly too tight around his thickening waistline. Beatrice stepped out wearing an absurdly large black fur coat and oversized designer sunglasses, despite the heavy rain and gloomy skies. Trailing behind them was a young man in his late teens, glued to his smartphone, chewing gum loudly, Preston. They marched right up to the front row. Beatrice actually let out a loud, theatrical sob, dabbing her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. Nathaniel placed a heavy hand on the casket, looking around to ensure people were watching him play the role of the grieving prodigal son. I felt physically ill. My fists clenched so tightly my fingernails bit into my palms, drawing tiny crescents of blood. I wanted to scream. I wanted to order them off the property. But out of respect for Grandpa Gregory, I kept my mouth shut. After the service, Nathaniel strutted over to me. He didn't offer a hug. He just looked me up and down, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "Samantha, look at you. You've got Dad's rustic aesthetic." He checked his gold Rolex. "Listen, Beatrice and I are staying at the boutique hotel downtown. Have the estate lawyer contact us by tomorrow afternoon. We need to get the paperwork sorted so we can get back to our lives in Monaco." He assumed he was taking over. He assumed he was the heir. 3 days later, we sat in the polished, mahogany-paneled office of attorney Thomas Reed, Grandpa Gregory's longtime lawyer and friend. The tension in the room was suffocating. Nathaniel sat with his legs crossed, projecting extreme confidence. Beatrice was filing her nails. Preston was asleep in a leather corner chair. I sat on the opposite side of the massive table, staring at my hands. "Mr." Reed cleared his throat, adjusting his reading glasses. "I will now read the last will and testament of Gregory Allen Hayes." He bypassed the standard legal preamble and got straight to the point. Gregory's estate, liquid assets, property portfolio, and business holdings were valued at approximately $3.4 million. To my biological son, Nathaniel Hayes, Mr. Reed read, his voice completely flat, who abandoned his own flesh and blood to chase empty vanity. "I leave my rusty 1989 Stanley toolbox, currently located in the third bay of the repair shop. I also leave him the sum of exactly $1, so that no court may ever entertain the delusion that I simply forgot him." Nathaniel's legs stopped bouncing. The blood instantly drained from his face, only to return seconds later in a furious, bright red flush. Beatrice dropped her nail file. "To my granddaughter, Samantha Hayes," Reed continued, ignoring the rising storm across the table, "who gave me the greatest joy of my life, and proved that true family is forged in loyalty and love. I leave the absolute entirety of my remaining estate, all business holdings, all real property, and all financial accounts." "That is a lie!" Nathaniel exploded, slamming both hands onto the table and shooting up from his chair. "That is a fraudulent document. He was an 84-year-old man. His brain was rotted." "Sit down, Nathaniel," Mr. Reed warned, his tone suddenly turning to ice. This will was updated and notarized 3 years ago, well before his diagnosis, complete with a psychiatric evaluation of competency attached as an addendum. He knew exactly what he was doing. Beatrice whipped her sunglasses off, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at me. You manipulative little tramp. You poisoned his mind against us. You isolated him in that dump of a house and forced him to sign everything over to you. You isolated yourselves? I finally snapped, my voice shaking with a rage I didn't know I possessed. You dropped me on a porch like a bag of garbage 24 years ago? You didn't even call him when he was dying. We will see about this, Nathaniel sneered, grabbing Beatrice's arm. You think you've won, you little mechanic? We are going to sue you until you don't even have the clothes on your back. Come on, Preston, he barked at the sleeping teenager. They stormed out of the office, the heavy oak door slamming behind them so hard the framed degrees on Mr. Matter. Reed's wall rattled. I looked at Mr. Reed, panic rising in my throat. Can they do that? Can they take it? Mr. Reed sighed heavily, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. Anyone can sue for anything, Samantha. And knowing your father, he's going to find the most vicious contingency lawyer he can. They will try to freeze the assets. They will try to starve you out legally. It's going to get ugly. He was right. Exactly 8 days later, I was formally served with a massive civil lawsuit. Nathaniel and Beatrice had retained William Blackwood, a high-profile, aggressively unethical litigator from Portland, known for dragging out estate disputes until the defending party went bankrupt from legal fees. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of fiction. They alleged elder abuse, undue influence, and fraud. They claimed I had purposely withheld medical care from Gregory to accelerate his death. They requested an immediate injunction freezing the estate's financial accounts. A sympathetic, out-of-touch judge granted the temporary freeze pending a preliminary hearing. Just like that, I was cut off. I couldn't access the business accounts to pay the mechanics. I couldn't access Gregory's personal accounts to pay the property taxes or even the utilities on the house. I was making $15 an hour as a part-time bookkeeper, and suddenly I was staring down the barrel of massive legal retainers. The wolves were at the door, and they had managed to lock me out of my own defenses. Nathaniel began sending me smug text messages from unknown numbers. Settle for 10% now, Sammy, and we'll drop the abuse charges. Otherwise, we're taking the house too. I was sitting on the floor of Gregory's home office late one night, surrounded by towering stacks of unsorted paperwork, crying out of sheer exhaustion. I was packing up his desk, looking for anything I could sell, old watches, tools, anything to pay the upcoming heating bill. As I pulled out the bottom right drawer of his heavy, antique oak desk, I noticed it was unusually shallow compared to the outside dimensions. I pressed my fingers against the bottom panel. It gave way with a soft click. It was a false bottom. I lifted the thin wooden panel. Resting inside the secret compartment was a thick, sealed manila envelope. Written across the front, in Grandpa Gregory's unmistakable blocky handwriting, were the words, "For Sammy, when the leeches come." My heart hammered against my ribs as I broke the seal and pulled out the contents. Grandpa Gregory hadn't just prepared for a legal battle. He had laid a trap. My hands trembled so violently I could barely hold the thick stack of papers I pulled from the envelope. Inside, alongside a small black USB drive, was a handwritten letter from my grandfather. The ink was faded, written years before his hands had grown weak and shaky from the cancer. "My dearest Sammy," the letter began. "If you are reading this, I am gone, and Nathaniel has come crawling out of the woodwork looking for a payday. I always knew he would. A leopard doesn't change its spots, and a leech doesn't stop sucking until it's full. I never told you the full truth about the night they left you, because I didn't want your heart to carry the burden of their rot. But now, you need the sword to cut them down." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears as I continued to read. "They didn't just abandon you, Sammy. They sold you." I stopped breathing. The words blurred on the page. I set the letter down and pulled out the first official document in the stack. It was a legal contract, dated the 14th of November 1999, just weeks after I was left on the porch. It was stamped, notarized by an official in Milan, Italy, and signed by Nathaniel Hayes, Beatrice Hayes, and Gregory Hayes. It was titled Voluntary Relinquishment of Parental Rights and Non-Disclosure Financial Settlement. Attached to the back of the contract was a faded bank transfer receipt. Grandpa Gregory had wired exactly $150,000 to an offshore account in Nathaniel's name. In exchange for this money, Nathaniel and Beatrice permanently surrendered all parental rights, consented to my legal adoption by Gregory, and most importantly, signed an ironclad waiver expressly forfeiting any future claim to Gregory's estate, trusts, or business holdings. The contract explicitly stated that the $150,000 was an advance and total buyout of any past, present, or future inheritance. They hadn't just walked away. They had held me hostage for seed money to start their pathetic importing business. My own parents had ransomed my existence. A wave of nausea washed over me, quickly replaced by a white-hot, consuming fury. But Grandpa Gregory wasn't done. I picked up the next file. It was a massive, incredibly detailed dossier compiled by a private investigator named Silas Montgomery. The dates on the reports stretched back nearly a decade, right up until a few months before Gregory's death. Grandpa had been keeping tabs on them. The dossier painted a pathetic, horrifying picture of Nathaniel and Beatrice's glamorous European lifestyle. Their importing business had gone bankrupt in 2012. Since then, they had been floating on massive lines of credit and running a sophisticated high-yield investment scam, a Ponzi scheme targeting wealthy expatriates in Monaco and the French Riviera. According to the investigators' final report, the house of cards had completely collapsed. They were in debt for over €4 million to incredibly dangerous people. The rented yacht, the designer clothes, the leased G-Wagon, it was all a desperate facade. They were completely broke, facing imminent criminal indictment in Europe, and desperate for an immediate cash injection to flee extradition. They didn't want Grandpa's estate because they felt entitled to it. They wanted it because it was the only thing keeping them out of an international prison. The elder abuse lawsuit wasn't just greed, it was a matter of survival. I grabbed the envelope, the documents, and my car keys. It was 3:00 a.m., but I didn't care. I drove straight to Mr. Reed's house and pounded on his front door until the porch light flicked on. When the bleary-eyed lawyer let me in, I dumped the contents of the envelope onto his kitchen island. They sued me to freeze the account, so I couldn't fight back, I breathed, my voice vibrating with adrenaline. But Grandpa knew. He left me a loaded gun. Mr. Reed put on his reading glasses. He read the $1,999 settlement. Then he read the investigator's executive summary. I watched a slow, dangerous smile spread across his wrinkled face, the smile of a veteran lawyer who had just been handed a royal flush. "Samantha," Mr. Reed said softly, looking up over the rim of his glasses, "we aren't going to settle. We are going to obliterate them." The preliminary injunction hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday, in front of Judge Harrison Caldwell, a no-nonsense magistrate known for his strict adherence to procedure and absolute intolerance for courtroom theatrics. I walked into the courtroom wearing one of my grandfather's old flannel shirts, neatly tucked into dress slacks, a quiet tribute to the man who truly raised me. Nathaniel and Beatrice sat at the plaintiff's table, looking like they had just stepped off a runway in Milan. William Blackwood, their slick, overpriced attorney, was pacing confidently, adjusting his silk tie. "Your Honor," Blackwood began, his voice dripping with faux sympathy as he addressed the judge, "we are here today to right a grievous wrong. My clients, the rightful and loving family of the late Gregory Hayes, were systematically alienated by the defendant. Miss Hayes took advantage of a dying, vulnerable old man, isolating him from his beloved son and forcing him to sign away a multi-million-dollar estate. We ask that the asset freeze remain in place and that an independent executor be appointed immediately." Judge Caldwell peered down from the bench, his expression unreadable. He turned to our table. "Mr. Reed, do you have a response?" Thomas Reed stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. He didn't look angry. He looked almost bored. "I do, Your Honor. In fact, we have a motion for immediate dismissal with prejudice, alongside a request for severe punitive sanctions against the plaintiffs and their counsel for filing a maliciously fraudulent claim." Blackwood let out a loud, patronizing scoff. "Fraudulent, Your Honor? The defendant is a 24-year-old part-time bookkeeper who suddenly inherited $3 million. The undue influence speaks for itself. The only thing speaking for itself today, Mr. Blackwood, is the documentary evidence," Reed countered smoothly. He picked up the 1,999 contract and handed a copy to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. He then walked over and dropped a copy squarely onto Blackwood's table. Your Honor, the plaintiffs are asserting standing as aggrieved legal heirs. However, 24 years ago, they voluntarily severed all legal and familial ties with the deceased. In exchange for a cash payment of $150,000, they signed an absolute waiver of inheritance, drafted and notarized in the presence of international authorities. Nathaniel's smug expression vanished. He sat bolt upright, his face draining of color. Beatrice grabbed his arm, her manicured nails digging into his expensive suit jacket. Blackwood scrambled to read the document, his eyes darting frantically across the page. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. A pre-existing contract does not negate the fact that the deceased lacked testamentary capacity when the current will was drafted. Oh, I assure you, Gregory Hayes had perfect capacity, Mr. Reed continued, his voice rising, commanding the room. In fact, his capacity was sharp enough to realize his estranged son was only returning to steal from him, to cover up massive international felony fraud. Objection! Blackwood shouted, panic finally cracking his polished veneer. Inflammatory and baseless. Mr. Reed didn't even flinch. He handed a thick, bound copy of Silas Montgomery's PI dossier to the bailiff. Defense Exhibit B, Your Honor. Certified financial records, offshore banking statements, and sworn affidavits from defrauded investors in Monaco. The plaintiffs did not return to Oregon out of grief. They returned because they are currently insolvent, facing millions in civil judgments in Europe, and are actively evading authorities. They filed this frivolous lawsuit to extort my client for capital to fund their flight from justice. The courtroom fell dead silent. The only sound was the heavy thud of Judge Caldwell dropping the thick dossier onto his desk. Judge Caldwell sat in deafening silence for 15 agonizing minutes, reading through the private investigator's dossier. With every turned page, Nathaniel sweat through his tailored Italian suit, while Beatrice stared blankly, her jaw clenched tight enough to crack molars. Finally, the judge removed his glasses, glaring down at the plaintiff's table with absolute revulsion. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Caldwell's voice was dangerously quiet. Did you perform even a cursory background check before filing this petition to freeze a multi-million-dollar estate? Blackwood stammered, his slick bravado entirely gone. Your Honor, I relied on my client's representations. Then you are either astoundingly incompetent or legally complicit, Caldwell snapped. The motion for an injunction is denied. The petition is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am granting the defense's request for sanctions. The plaintiffs will pay every cent of Miss Hayes's legal fees. Nathaniel jolted upright. Your Honor, wait! That money is my birthright. Crack! The gavel dropped like a gunshot. Mr. Hayes, sit down and remain silent, the judge ordered. You came into my courtroom with unclean hands to facilitate a shakedown. Not only is your lawsuit dismissed, but I am legally obligated to report credible evidence of international wire fraud. I will be forwarding Defense Exhibit B to the FBI and the IRS immediately. Court is adjourned. It was an absolute slaughter. Blackwood violently shoved his papers into his briefcase. He turned to Nathaniel. You lied to me. You're broke. My representation ends right now. Do not call my office. He stormed out of the courtroom without looking back. Mr. Reed gave me a warm, victorious wink. The crushing weight of the past month completely evaporated. We walked out into the grand marble corridor. Nathaniel and Beatrice were waiting by the elevators, looking like trapped animals. Their son, Preston, was nowhere to be seen. Samantha, please, Nathaniel begged, blocking my path. He looked genuinely terrified. We made mistakes when we were young, but we're family. If you just give us $500,000 to clear our debts, we'll disappear forever. I swear. I looked at the people who had brought me into the world and felt nothing but cold, hard emptiness. You already disappeared, Nathaniel, I said, my voice echoing off the marble. You disappeared 24 years ago when you sold me for $150,000. Grandpa Gregory raised me to recognize a bad investment. You are a bad investment. You selfish brat, Beatrice hissed, her face contorting with rage. We gave you life. I owe you nothing, I replied coldly. But you owe the IRS, the FBI, and half of Monaco. I suggest you start running. Pushing through the heavy courthouse doors, the universe delivered its final, perfect punchline. A heavy-duty tow truck was backing up to their rented black Mercedes G-Wagon. Nathaniel sprinted down the concrete steps, screaming at the driver. "Lease is 4 months delinquent, buddy," the tow driver shrugged, handing him a business card. Bank ordered the repossession. Nathaniel stood in a muddy puddle, screaming as his last symbol of fake wealth was hauled away. Beatrice sat on a concrete bench, put her head in her hands, and finally sobbed. True to the judge's word, the fallout was swift. 3 weeks later, the FBI arrested Nathaniel and Beatrice at a cheap motel near the Seattle airport, attempting to board a flight to a non-extradition country. They were indicted for massive wire fraud and tax evasion. I set up a modest, tightly controlled college trust fund for Preston, just enough so he wouldn't starve, and told him to never contact me again. With the accounts unfrozen, I officially rebranded the company to Hayes and Daughter Industrial. On the 1-year anniversary of his death, I visited Grandpa Gregory's grave. "The wolves came. Grandpa," I whispered into the breeze, laying down yellow roses. "And just like you promised, they broke their own teeth. Did Samantha's ruthless revenge against her toxic parents satisfy your craving for karma? Let us know your favorite twist in the comments. If you love this story of justice and legacy, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life drama stories every single week.